On September 4th, for 76 AD, a teenage boy was removed from a throne and sent to live in a castle by the sea. His name was Romulus Augustulus. He was the last emperor of the Western Roman Empire, and almost nobody noticed. No battle was fought that day, no city burned, no crowd gathered to watch the end of the most powerful civilization the ancient world had ever produced. A general named Odoacer simply walked into Ravenna, told the boy his services were no longer required, and that was it. 1,229 years of Rome, gone in an afternoon. But here is the thing historians spend careers trying to explain. Rome didn't fall on September 4th for 176 AD. It had already been falling for 200 years. And the weapon that destroyed it wasn't a sword. It wasn't a plague. It wasn't the Germanic tribes pressing at the borders. It was the Roman economy quietly eating itself alive. To understand how Rome died, you first have to understand how Rome was paid for. At its peak, the Roman Empire controlled territory stretching from Scotland to the edge of Mesopotamia. It maintained a professional army of over 400,000 soldiers. It built roads across 3 continents. It fed a city of 1 million people, the largest city on Earth at the time. All of this required money. Enormous, continuous, almost unimaginable amounts of money. For the first 2 centuries of the empire, that money came from conquest. Every new territory Rome absorbed brought slaves, gold, and tribute flowing back to Rome. The system was self-funding. War paid for war. The empire paid for itself. Then the conquest stopped. By around 117 AD, under Emperor Trajan, the Roman Empire reached its maximum size. After Trajan, the borders essentially froze. No major new territories were absorbed. The flow of war-acquired wealth slowed to a trickle and then stopped almost entirely. But the costs didn't stop. The army still needed to be paid. The roads still needed to be maintained. The food supply still needed to be secured. The bureaucracy still needed to function. An empire the size of Rome does not become cheap simply because it stops expanding. So the Roman government did what governments have done throughout history when they run out of money. They started manipulating the currency. This is the part most history classes skip. In the early empire, the standard Roman silver coin, called the denarius, was made of nearly pure silver, around 95% silver content. It was a coin people trusted. It held its value. You could take a denarius minted in the reign of Augustus and spend it 100 years later without anyone questioning its worth. Then, slowly, almost imperceptibly, the emperors began reducing the silver content. Not by much at first. A percent here, a percent there. The coin looked the same. It weighed roughly the same. But inside, the silver was being replaced with cheaper metals, bronze, copper, lead. By 268 AD, the denarius contained less than 2% silver. 2%. The coin that had once been the financial backbone of the ancient world had become, essentially, a bronze token with a silver wash. What happened next was as predictable as gravity. Merchants noticed. Soldiers noticed. Everyone who had ever held a coin noticed that the money in their hands was worth less than it used to be. Prices rose. Then they rose again. Then they rose so fast the government issued price controls. The Edict of Diocletian in 301 AD, listing maximum prices for hundreds of goods across the empire. It didn't work. It never works. Merchants simply stopped selling rather than sell at a loss. Goods disappeared from markets. The economy contracted. Trade routes that had operated for centuries began to collapse. What Rome was experiencing is something economists today would immediately recognize: hyperinflation. Meanwhile, the borders were not holding. The Germanic tribes that had been pressing against the Rhine and Danube frontiers for generations were not a new problem. Rome had fought them, absorbed them, traded with them, and hired them as soldiers for centuries. But a weakened economy meant a weakened army. Soldiers who were paid in increasingly worthless coins demanded payment in food, land, or goods instead. Supply chains broke down. Loyalty fractured. By the 4th century, the Roman army was recruiting and relying heavily on the very Germanic peoples it was supposed to be defending against. Commanders of Germanic origin rose to the highest military ranks. The line between Roman soldier and foreign mercenary blurred until it effectively disappeared. Odoacer, the general who removed Romulus Augustulus from the throne in 476 AD, was not a Roman general who turned on Rome. He was a Germanic chieftain whose men were the Roman army. So why did Rome fall overnight? It didn't. That's the point. It fell the way the writer Ernest Hemingway once described going bankrupt, gradually, and then suddenly. 200 years of currency debasement had hollowed out the financial infrastructure of the empire. Tax revenues collapsed. because the coins taxes were paid and were worth almost nothing. The government printed, or rather, minted, more coins to cover its debts, which made each coin worth even less. The army became unreliable. The borders became porous. The food supply became unstable. The population of the city of Rome itself fell from 1 million people at its peak to as few as 20,000 by the 6th century. Not because of a battle, not because of a plague, because the system that kept 1 million people fed, employed, and protected had simply run out of the financial credibility to function. What finally pushed Rome over the edge was not one event. It was the compounding of 2 centuries of structural failure. By the time Odoacer walked into Ravenna in 476, there was almost nothing left to take. The Western Empire was already a ghost. Its provinces had been functionally independent for decades. Its army was already Germanic. Its tax base had collapsed. Its trade networks had shrunk. Odoacer didn't conquer Rome. He inherited a vacancy. Historians debate many causes of Rome's fall. Edward Gibbon famously cited moral decline and the rise of Christianity. Others point to climate change, pandemic disease. The Antonine Plague of 165 AD and the Plague of Cyprian in 249 AD each killed millions, and the relentless pressure of migration from Central Asia that pushed Germanic tribes into Roman territory. All of these played a role, but the financial collapse came first. It made everything else worse. A wealthy, financially stable Rome might have absorbed the plagues. It might have held the borders. It might have integrated the Germanic peoples more successfully. A Rome running on coins worth 2% of their stated value had no resilience left. When the pressure finally came, there was nothing to push back with. Here is what makes this story matter beyond ancient history. Every element of Rome's financial collapse has a modern name. Currency debasement is called inflation. The Edict of Diocletian is called price controls. The reliance on foreign soldiers is called outsourcing national security. The contraction of trade is called supply chain failure. The Romans didn't have those words, but they lived every single consequence. The most powerful civilization the ancient world ever produced was not destroyed by its enemies. It was destroyed by a financial decision made quietly, in a mint, by accountants who thought they were solving a short-term problem. They just created a catastrophe that took 200 years to fully arrive. On September 4th, 476 AD, a teenage boy walked out of a palace and into obscurity. The last emperor of Rome was given a pension and a castle by the sea. He lived out the rest of his days in relative comfort, watching the sun set over the Mediterranean. The empire that had ruled the world was gone. And in the mint where the denarius was once forged from nearly pure silver, the furnaces had long since gone cold.